It's time for the final, I don't know if talk is the correct term really, event of the day. I will actually just leave the scene to you, Alistair, I think. Off you go.
Sorry?
I will just leave the scene to you.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. So, I'm aching to move this thing a little bit. Hey, I'm the last speaker today. I can actually do this, right? And I don't ruin it for anybody else. Good. So what I do as I go around the world, and I do community events, and I show up, and I used to give talks, and I just found that the thing that's kind of the most fun for people is if you ask a question, that I have to try to find a story around the question, so you don't just get my opinion. Alistair, what do you think about microservices? You know, oh, good stuff. You know, like objects and lambdas and everything else. But I have to like somehow find an experience that sheds some light on the question. And if I can't find a story, then I can't answer the question, right? So the very first time I did it, the very first question was, tell us a story about transforming to agile at scale. And I said, I don't have a story, right? So that was the end of that question. And I did that for the first several rounds until eventually, like, I found a way to approach the question instead of just saying I don't have an answer. But it's significant, right? If I don't have a story, that's already pretty significant. So we have two runners with microphones. Where are our two runners with microphones? There's Matthias with one, and what's your name? As the other. And so I kind of like it if we can bounce around the room, some people in the back. And also, I'm pretty sensitive, right, if it's only men asking questions. So I like to see some women asking questions. And if there's been a bunch of men asking questions and no women asking questions, I'll actually stall and wait for one of the three women in the room to ask a question. So you women, get your questions ready, right? So we'll do it that way. Would anybody like to be, who would like to be maybe the first person to pop? And questions on any topic, you know, personal, private, professional, technical, and if it's too personal, I won't answer, but otherwise, what the hell, let's go see. We have one right here. Thank you very much for being the first one.
So why don't people want to collaborate?
Ooh, why don't people want to collaborate? I have to find a story, right? I can't just pontificate on that one. Why don't people want to collaborate? So, yeah, why do we get our feelings all up in a huff? Like, I know I'm right. I've heard it so many times. I've tried 3 times, Alistair. I'm just not going to try a 4th. And so the story I'm going to tell is I moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, and there's a company that does the website development for Heart of Agile called Big C. SEA, like ocean, Big C. And they're 3 blocks from my house. And I chose them because they do Agile on the 3 blocks from my house, so I can walk over and talk to them. That's like why I chose them. And so that was really cool, so I'd walk over. And so I made a point of meeting the CTO and the lead designer and the programmer, and I met them all face to face like this. And the person I didn't meet because she wasn't there was the account rep. Now, you know, the purpose of an account rep is to keep the client from talking to the programmer. That's what the job of an account rep, right? That's what account reps do, is they talk to the clients, the customers, so that the customers don't bother the programmers who are very busy people. You know, and I knew that was her job, and she knew that was her job, and she wasn't there. So she wrote me some emails, and I tried to be very nice in a couple of emails and sidle around her, because I told them I was going there so I could co-design with them, right? Anyway, so it was a little bit kind of cold response from her. And I wrote to Sole, who's my partner in all of this, and I said, I've tried 2 or 3 times. I don't actually like working with her because she's blocking me. I can't get past her to the programmers. Right? Why don't I like to collaborate, right? I was standing in I've tried 3 times, I've tried to be nice, and she won't get out of the way and let me get access to the programmers. This is the closest I can get to the why, right? But I'm telling you what I'm feeling inside. And Sola said, have you tried walking over and talking to her? And remember what I said, you know how to collaborate, you just don't want to? And I was like, no, I don't want to. I'm not going to walk over there and talk to her. I've already sent 3 emails, by God, right? I've tried 3 times. I've tried everything that's humanly possible. I've done my part. It's up to her now, right? But because I give this lecture all the time, but I mean, really, the sensation was really strong in me. And it's happened actually a couple of times where we've done this, and there's another person, and you know, I've reached out 3 times. I go, by God, I've done it 3. Now, you ask me, what is it that stops? I can't tell you what the word is for that emotion, right? But you all identify with me, right? I've done my part. I've reached out 3 times. It's not for me anymore. But since I give the lecture about collaborate, and you know how, I go, so, you know, I walked over and made as close friends, and blah, 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 and things happened and stuff like that. So there's that barrier, right? I've done my part. Right? And there's a fear like, I'm going to find out that actually I'm in the wrong. I know if I go over there, I'm going to learn that I was the person in the wrong on this communication part, and I don't want to know that. Right? That's what I've got. That's my story. Nice question. Thank you for the opening question. We have one over here. Do we have a question over here? I'm going to try to do side by side. We're down in the front. I love it. The women are all getting in the queue early, so they're observed. Here, right here. You have the mic? Matthias, give it to her. Man.
And do you have any story regarding a productive retrospective meeting?
I have no idea what you just said.
Do you
hold the mic closer. So
okay, sorry. Do you have any example of a productive retrospective meeting?
Yeah, productive retrospective. I don't use the word retrospectives. It's a word that comes from a different, right? I've been doing this as long as anybody, and I always use the word reflection workshop, just my words. Retrospective is about looking backwards. I don't like looking backwards. I look forwards. So the problem with a retrospective is you spend all your time looking backwards. Stories of productive ones, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, almost all of them are productive. It's easy to name lots of unproductive ones. Let me see. So if we do a reflection workshop for a minute, right? Let's not do a retrospective because I don't tend to do that too much. My favorite one, and I kind of hinted at it in my talk, if I go to a new group, if I have a bit of time, and I'll say, brainstorm and list on these yellow Post-it notes all the things you ever had on the projects that you liked. You heard me say that this morning. I love that opening question. They all go up there. And then I say, the projects that you didn't like, in this like red Post-it notes, brainstorm and list all the things that you didn't like about those. Now do some dot voting and sort them, right? And now the ones with the highest dot votes that are red, name anything you can think of that you can do to make sure that doesn't show up here. Right? The things that you do like, that you dot voted and you take the top ones, brainstorm and list any of the things you think you could do to make those show up here, right? So we've got a set of potential actions. Now we have a set of actions. Now take those and see if you can tag team 2 people who will work on any pairs of those and put your initials on the ones you're willing to work on, right? So this is something that maybe takes a bit longer, right, than an hour. It might be done once. And then you have an actual plan on interesting things to do after that, yeah? I'll give you that as we've done that a couple of times. One that worked, I didn't like it, so it's hard for me to say it was a successful one. Because you wait too long, then the tension builds up too much. So I think a month is a good length of time. Ignore sprint lengths, just a month is a good length of time, 6 weeks for doing a check. I like it if it's after a delivery because then you can talk about the things you did before the delivery that added up to the delivery and so on. But occasionally I get called in for, it's been too long, 2 months, 3 months, right? There's too much negative energy built up. And so the kind of thing that we did is just like popping a blister, right? Really, you're just trying to let the emotions out so you can move forward, because I told you I'm forward thinking. You take a line and you say, mood graph over time. How has your mood been over the course of the last couple of months? If there are particular highs or lows, what was the event that was there? Da, 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 da. You do that, draw pictures. of how you felt when you were good, how you felt when you were bad. And then for me, I throw all that stuff in the trash, because that's the only purpose of that was to let people say something. Yeah. Now that you've gotten all of that out of your way, what are some things you'd like to do that will improve the situation a little bit? And then you get into action plans and so on. So I've done that a couple of times. But I prefer the word reflection workshop, because then you can take time, then you understand the purpose is for the team to work on being a team. And the short story, the first time I saw this, and it really knocked my socks off, was in 1998. I interviewed the first extreme programming project, and I was there on a Monday, and this guy said, I came in today and somebody had changed the code over the weekend and something didn't run. And I don't know who was in here and what they changed. So could I request that when people come in on the weekend, they put some notes or markers up so we know what they did, right? So you get that very politeness that was there already in extreme programming in 1998. Nice one. Thank you so much. Anybody with any questions? Let's go back to this side of the room. How about the middle? No, we did the middle. How about you guys? You guys have been, yes, we have a hand up. Thank you. You see how this works, right? You can pick any topic you like.
All right, your biggest failure.
My biggest failure? Oh man, you know what's interesting? People talk about, why don't you ever talk about failures? You can learn from failures. You can't learn anything from failures that I can figure out. The failures are so big and they're so bad and they're so obvious and they're screaming at you, and there's like, right? That they fall through everything. So I don't know biggest, but I'll give you one that's on my mind. It was in 2003, and I was trying to get people to do sort of, like hexagonal architecture type things without being too fancy about it, but to have lots of testing, and it was going to be a big project and it was going to get distributed. And so I wanted people to write tests, hexagonal architecture type of tests. And everybody was kind of like technically inclined. And so the business person said, this is awesome. I want this because we're going to have people in India writing stuff and people in Utah writing stuff. We'll have these boundaries and we'll have these tests that will guarantee that things will work. And the tech lead said, absolutely, this is awesome. We're going to have these tests. And the guy who was in charge of the integration machine said, man, I'm not letting anything in until we get these tests, right? So like I had 3 layers of safety net on there, and I go and I work with a guy and we downloaded, it wasn't hexagonal architecture, it was fitness, right? Fit and fitness, you guys, anybody remember fit and fitness? Ward Cunningham, and it was this, and then Bob Martin added, the extra thing. So I went with this, and the tech lead really didn't want to do it. And so he gave me the most junior programmer to sit with, and we downloaded the tutorial and we wrote up an example, and we went through the thing, and then it kind of never happened. And then they had the 2-week sprints, and they had a card on the board, right, of the things they were going to do in the sprint, and it didn't get done. And so they carried it over to the next sprint, and then they carried it over to the next sprint. And I'm going like, where's the team lead that was going to make sure it was done? Where's the promise of the configuration manager guy who said he wasn't going to let anything hit, real configuration integration unless they had those tests? And where's the business guy who, 3 layers of protection I had on that, straight through, right? What do you learn from that? I don't know. And I had another one, and I won't name the company because that would embarrass them a bit too much. But they said, we're going to do this agile thing. Yeah. And I know how to do carpaccio and make really thin slice stories. In the end, they gave me 3 hours a week of a junior programmer. You can't do anything in 3. Like, I can slice stuff really fine. I can slice things so it's about 3 hours of work. But as the weeks go by, I was paying equal in management fees, right? And I felt sorry for the junior programmer because she comes to work. She's got 12 clients, and she gets 3 hours for each client, right? She can't make progress on any of them, and I couldn't get the people to give me more than 3 hours, right? So you can jump to the left, you can jump to the right, you can do anything. But if you've got 3 hours a week of a junior programmer, right, you can't do a thing. What did I learn from that? I didn't learn anything. Go get a different company where like insist you get more than 3 hours. I don't know, right? So these failures that happen, like I say, they're so screaming in your face. I mean, I know all of this stuff, but if they only give me 3 hours, I can't do a thing. If the people who say they're going to check that the tests happen all go, yeah, sorry about that. And they eventually took the card off the board. They just like forgot about it. Yeah. So those are failures. Good? Nice. We have one in the middle here, if we could get a mic to him. Oh, you get 2 mics, man.
Yeah, so we developers in our team, we want to build a software in really small steps, right? We want to optimize for learning. That's something that we heard. Yeah, we want to do that.
Yeah.
But UX and design, they have plans for 6 months.
But sorry, I missed the word. The what?
The UX and design people.
Yeah.
Have like plans and mock-ups and prototypes for 6 months in advance.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we build this incrementally when we got all these things? And our definition of done is basically a big, advanced, GUI mock-up.
So let me see. Stories. Jeff Gotthelf. Anybody know this name? I think he wasn't one of the sense and respond people, but is he? He's one of the sense and respond people. He's out teaching these days, co-teaching with Jeff Patton. And I know Jeff Patton, he was my neighbor for years, and we used to trade notes when he was learning his stuff. And so I'll quote a bit of Jeff Patton. But actually, Jeff Gotthelf hired me to go visit his company in New York one time. So I have a story that involves him. And Jeff said, I have this problem that I hire designers and they come from school, design school. And in design school, they're taught that, you know, designers are like gods and they go up to the mountains and they do all this stuff and then they come down. And I have to break them of that. Now, here's the thing, is programmers can't break designers of that because the only thing higher than a programmer, since after all, God is below programmers, the only thing higher than a programmer is a designer, right? Who talks directly with God 2 stages down, like that. He said, I actually have a problem because I can't get them, I have to first get them to think incrementally that their design isn't the ultimate design. So it's a problem that they come out of the school with that. And then Jeff Patton went to Alan Cooper, right? There's all these famous names here. And he went to Alan Cooper and he said, so Alan, you guys, you know, do this design work. You're Alan Cooper Inc., right? This company, and they do design for cameras or whatever. And you're right, and they produce a big spec book. That's the design that they came up with. How often does it happen that your clients implement that exactly and then it turns out to be the right thing? And Alan said, because he's honest as well, he said, never. Right? Remember what I said about decisions? You think about the number of decisions that are in that design book. What are the odds that all 10,000, 20,000 decisions in there are correct? Roughly, like, can't happen, right? But then again, staying with Jeff Patton, because I watched him, he went to Alan Cooper, he went to like all of the big names, including me for use cases, right? And he put it all together, right? He spent years studying under like all of the masters. And he told me at that time, he said, look, one of the problems we've got with the UX design, I don't call them designers. I'm sorry, programmers are designers. Everybody's making a design decision. I don't like that they've called themselves designer and everybody else is not a designer. That's not fair, right? There's types of design that we're doing, so I'll call them the UX designers. He said this before, during, and after. I love this little categorization he did. He said this, you have to study like the ethnographics of the behaviors and the desires and the movements of the people to figure out, right, that's the theory of the world. We're going to stick our finger into the world, inject something into the world. You have to understand a bit how the world works. You can't do that on the fly. You have to do that before. Then you've got the during people, where you've got the design that's working, you know, like while you're working with the programming and you're changing and you're building and stuff and you're like releasing whatever. And then less these days than in the 90s, you've got the after people who measure the actual effectiveness of the thing that got built. And the little bit, the trouble that the UX people have got is they have to do all three. They have to understand the users in order to even make a suggestion what could work. Then they have to be there for the incremental building. Then they have to measure the result afterwards. There's just not enough human to be doing all three, right? And you can't do all three on the fly. And I've met designers, the UX designers, who say, we have this problem. We're trying to figure out the general form and shape, but we're only given like 2-week increments. We have to do this. And there was a guy who worked at Motorola, and he came up with the phrase big rocks and little rocks. And this works for architecture also, by the way, and also UI design, that you want to take time up front to figure out where the big rocks are, and you want to get the big rocks correct. And then there are a lot of little rocks you can move around, and you can do those incrementally. So for the UX design people, they do have an assignment of understanding and getting certain things in place first. Then following Jeff Gotthelf's, there's a training thing they need to learn to work, alongside. And then there's the after measurement. So it's a tricky business. It's not a simple integration for the UI design. But I got some stories in to answer your question. And then the man sitting next to you, I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Julian? Julian's going to ask a question because he asked it in the break, and I gave him the first 2/3 of the answer, and I told him I would finish the answer when he asked it live. So could we get a microphone to Julian here, please? Not that I'm going to call you out by name or anything. But
no, that's awesome. Actually, I've been sat here the whole time, like trying to formulate this question again in my head, so everyone else will understand without this like massive pre-explanation. Anyway, I've done it. So here it is. Here it is. So yesterday, I was sat with my colleague, the guy next to me, and I was writing a little bit of code. I was going to click this button, and then the CSS class was supposed to appear in this element, and that wasn't happening. Now, I consider myself to be quite an open-minded, quite easygoing kind of guy. I was considered to be somewhat of a hippie during my teenage years.
Are you going to turn this into a question, by the way?
It's a question, don't worry. We're getting
okay.
There. So I've noticed at work, I can be quite stubborn. And what I mean by that is that, like, so in trying to tackle this problem, August was like, oh, why don't we write a test for this? And like in that moment, I was like, we don't need to do that. This is like a really easy, basic thing. Anyway, a few minutes later, I did try writing the test, and we figured out the answer. But like the question is, how do you address like that feeling of like resistance or like not wanting to do something?
So the question was a lot shorter when he asked it out there. now that he's comfortable with the mic in his hands,
I did say
the question that he asked out there was I feel resistance to change. What is that thing, and is there anything you can do about it? Right? And then he had the story about the CSS. And like with your question, these are like, I have no idea what the labels are on these things. But what crossed my mind that maybe at work, right? You're used to doing things a certain way. You're good at doing things a certain way. And what crossed my mind was maybe when we're at work, it's a kind of a performance art, right? We're performers also for ourselves, but and also for our colleagues. And we're faced with doing something a little bit different, right? We're going to go whatever, we're going to go microservices, or we're going to go serverless, or we're going to do TDD, or we're going to do Carpaccio slices, or we're going to do something a little bit different, and we know our performance is going to drop, right? At that moment, there's this like egos right up here. I can do this, I can do this, I can, what? I have to, what, right? And there's this fear of a performance drop, yeah? But I have to tell a story, and so I chose a story that happened to me recently. I was in Colombia. I speak Spanish well enough that I was teaching a 2-day class in Spanish in Medellin, Colombia. But because it's not my mother tongue, I said I can handle up to 24 people in the class. Above 24, when you get above 30, it's not about teaching, it's crowd control, right? There's a lot of crowd control to get the people ask the question, not ask the question, be quiet, all of that sort of stuff. My Spanish isn't up to that level. And they had 36 people in the class. And the people were quite nervous. The cultural style in Medellin is different than other places. And they were very sensitive and very jumpy. And so it was really, really hard work for me. And the problem I had was my organizer, very nice guy, very smart. kept coming up to me with ideas of things to do different in the middle of the class. Now, I've been teaching, you know, I actually have been teaching since 1989. So I've been teaching for 40 years now at this point in time. Is that true? Can't be true. 30 years. Thank you very much. Whew. Just, the math wasn't working out right. So like I'm sweating and I'm sweating and I give the people some exercise and he comes up right behind me and he says, Alistair, I have a great idea. Why don't we just and put these things up here and reference this flip chart and do. And I'm thinking, man, just go away. I just got them to do an exercise. Damn, that's a good idea. Oh my God, I have to do it. Right? So I had to like on the fly rearrange my world to do what he just said, right? And oh my God, I felt so bad. Like I was sweating blood the whole time, right? And they were all good. The worst part was every one of his suggestions was good, right? So I couldn't actually turn any of them down. But man, my brain was exploding everywhere. Yeah, so there's this performance thing, like you're in a comfort zone. I can do this. I can do this. I can, oh, what? Right? Anyway, that's all I got on that one. That's all I got, man. But that's the end of the story. Thank you very much. We're over here now. We have one down in the front. And you people in the back, stop hanging out, right? Think of a question, because, thank you.
So the question is, I would like a story about how you can convince upper management for when you want to address things like technical debt and like rewriting parts of the same stuff.
Ooh, yeah. So, I don't have any stories, man. One of the questions that I typically am careful never to answer is how do I get those people, how do I convince those people of something, right? Because I think that's a dangerous question, right? The generic form of the question that I refuse to answer is, how do I get those people over there to behave the way I want them to, even though they don't want to? Right? There's a generic form of question that you're sidling up against the boundary of that question. And I don't answer that question because, first of all, I don't think we can get those people over there to behave the way we want to, even though they don't want to. And if we could answer that question, then the North Korean government would get a hold of that technology and be using it all the time. And so I don't want an answer to that question. And if I had an answer to the question, I would pretend that I didn't have an answer to that question. So I don't have an answer to that question. But the other thing is just in general convincing people of, you know, of stuff like that. The technical debt one is really tough. The story I have only is when I was the sponsor. So my first website redesign is in 2007, and I hired a friend who was a good programmer. And I said, you're the technology person, I'm going to be the sponsor. I will not tell you how to, you know, do your technology thing. And the first thing he said was, we're going to use C#. I went, crap, there goes the open source options on this project. And we sat there. And so we coded and we did micro slices. Nothing ever took longer than 20 minutes to implement. No slice from like the moment I said a word until we had it running on the screen took longer than 20 minutes. That's the micro slicing that we do. And neither of us are particularly, you know, XP people or anything like that, so we didn't have any tests. But there was a day, because I am a programmer and I'm watching this thing, there's a day I came in and said, and I'm paying, right? He was charging me $70 an hour. I watched him work, and I said, no, you're too good, I'm paying you $140 an hour. So you're not doing me a favor, I'm high on your priority list. You'll pay attention to me as a customer, it's not as a friend, and I know value for money, and you're doing it. So at $140 an hour of my own personal money, I said, we're writing tests on this part, right? So we did that, but we bounded it. And there was a moment when I looked at the code and I said, we're in trouble, man. We're refactoring. $140 an hour, whatever it takes, we're sitting here, we're doing it, right? So I can tell you because I understood it, but also I bounded it. Now, how do you have that conversation with somebody who doesn't understand? I have a story for you. In 1994-95 was a big Smalltalk project that I was on. Not many people did small talk in those days. And so we had some junior people who came just out of college and they were learning, right? The project was about 15 months long. And after about a year, the junior guy was no longer a junior guy. He was a year later writing small talk every single day. And he said, this, some of this old code really sucks. Yeah, it was his code, but it didn't matter, right? He said, if I go into a method, I'm going to clean it up. I won't go like clean up everything all around it. I don't have time. But if I go into this method, I'm going to clean up this method. So everywhere I go will come out cleaner. And I don't have to tell anybody I'm doing that. It's just the cost of doing business. It's just the fact. That's my speed of making changes. That I'm cleaning this up. There was a little cleaned up trajectory wherever he had gone. And this reminded me of when I had a house and I would call the electrician or the plumber. And the plumber came and we had, in Utah, everything's very old and they had iron pipes or whatever, copper pipes or something. And he said, if I touch this pipe, it's out of code. It doesn't meet the modern standards of something. I have to change all of these things. It's the law and you have to pay for it and I don't get any chance. So it's like, right? And so the electrical guys came and I said, can you move this plug from here to here? They said, yeah, but I have to bring it out of the wall and put a fake plate on, a plate on, so everybody can see that I had touched it there. And I can't paint over it and you can't hide it. It's the law, right? So this programmer was behaving like the plumber, right? And saying, if I touch it, I will clean it. I will leave it up to code. I will bring it up to code. I don't have to touch all the pipes in the house, but if I touch this, I have to do that. And so the people who do the cleaning of the technical debt, it's the cost of doing business, it's the speed of movement, and they just clean it up as they move. They don't try to do big. So it doesn't, you don't have to convince management. That's just the speed of movement, but you have to be careful you don't like take on a too big thing. That's the stories what I've got on. We still have time. We're doing very well. You guys have actually been doing this for half an hour. We have one down here.
I want a story on a successful distributed team.
Success of a distributed team is very difficult. I hate distributed teams, every split second of them. I've been on them since 1997, 98. IC Agile was done with a distributed team. Heart of Agile is done with a distributed team. When we did IC Agile, Ahmed Sidki and he was in Washington, I was in Salt Lake. I just know we could solve this in a half an hour if we were just together. Like every place, like I will delay until I go to a place. Like I had to do a thing for the Heart of Agile. I had a group in Argentina that were going to bid for me. I waited till I went to Argentina. I spent a half an hour talking with the programmer. We solved all the problems in a half an hour, right? So when you say distributed team, let me just think of stories. My champion for distributed team is a guy in Australia called Craig Brown. And I had a theory at one point in time. I said to somebody, if you want to have a distributed team, you need to have, at the accounting level, at the CFO, a budget line item for building trust. Okay, I said this even before I had Heart of Agile and the word trust up there. You need a budget line item for building trust. And if you're a co-located team, your budget line item for building trust will account for going for beer and pizza or bowling on occasion and doing some social activities together for help building trust. If you have a distributed team, the budget line item must include airplane fare and hotels to put the whole team together and go do weekend activities and build trust that way. And I said, probably you will never implement this because the CFO or somebody very high will say, or some manager will say, strike that line item. But it has to be a non-negotiable line item that's based on the distance and the amount of money it takes to bring everybody together, right? To do the face-to-face, to get that communication and rapport built up. So I was going to Australia every year, And this guy, Craig Brown, was working for a great company that was very agile and blah, 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 and got bought by a company that got bought by a company, so everybody got rich, maybe, I don't know. But they were super effective. They bought all their competitors, and then they got bought by somebody, Oracle or something. And they were in the construction business. They made software for managing construction projects or something, but it didn't matter. And he had managed to get certain amount of funds to fly the people from India to Melbourne, Australia. They had one guy in San Francisco, and he'd fly them in, and they would do pub crawls and stuff. And he came to me one day, and he said, I have the budget line item for building trust, and I can tell you how much it is. $140,000 a year. He said, my boss, and it's his boss I want to interview sometime to figure out who the heck is his boss. His boss said to him, we're doing the budgeting for the upcoming year, and then suddenly turns to Craig and says, what's your budget line item you need for building trust? Yeah, like my jaw dropped because this guy had been listening, and they settled on $140,000, and he had $140,000 a year for the sole purpose of flying people in and going on pub crawls or whatever they would do for the. He said I was in Australia and I'm in trouble here. I have to find something for the non-drinkers to do. Okay, because they always go for beer. But anyway, the point was, then when that company bought all their competitors, they bought competitors actually in England, France, Germany, and Russia. Now, they spent a week and they flew everybody into some place in Europe and they did a big bonding meeting, right? And I thought about the drinking contests that probably went on between the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Russians, and the Australians. That would be quite a sight to behold, I imagine. But that's the story, you know, on the distributed projects is that. You want to, I have more stories of that variety, yeah? Otherwise, I'm not a specialist on distributed. I try to avoid them like a plague. They land on me, and I hate every second of them. Good. We have one in the back here and one in the back there. So we'll get these two people in a row, and we'll see how we are on the time.
Is there a topic you hope you don't have to teach anymore next year?
Nah, I like all of my topics. I try to teach stuff and let people raise questions and chase me around the room, and I like it when they do stuff I don't expect. The micro story inside of there was the use case class, right? I used to teach use cases, and I licensed it out to about 5 people, all senior people, expert use case people, developers, consultants, like very high-level people. And each one of them eventually had a breakdown inside of my classes because as super experts, if you go to teach a technology like objects, you're the expert, the people in the class can't argue with you. But we would use ATMs as our example for writing use cases. And ATMs are A, they're different everywhere in the world, and B, everybody knows how they work. But they all work differently, and typically we don't know how they work different places, right? So these guys would go and teach, and always it would happen within the first couple of classes, they would get low evaluations, and I'd get these phone calls from the airport, like from several of them. Alistair, I don't understand. You know, why? It's because you have to be open to surprises. Like I've so many times had a debate with someone in the class. There's one guy, and I go, yeah, ATMs don't work like that. He says, oh yeah, they do, because I programmed the ones in Portugal, and this is how it works. And then you have to go, okay, right? So as a teacher, you have to allow yourself to be surprised. And if you get in the habit of that, you know, back to his question, you know, that you have to be open to surprise and be wrong and learn on the fly and be embarrassed and red in the face or whatever, you know, dance with it, then every class is interesting. Yeah, thanks. And we have a question in the back.
Hi, I have a very specific request. I would like to hear your snowbird story because I've heard most of the other ones, and I like.
Oh, who have you heard from?
Martin, Kent. I've heard from Kent several times. Martin, Bob, and I think that's it so far.
Yeah, and Ari van Menneken's going around. We got to trade notes after. I have to find out what the others said because I don't know what they said. I know what Kent said. Kent said I wasn't feeling well that day, and yeah, I didn't do much. I suppose unofficially, I could imagine that he knew that XP was coming off of center stage and becoming one of the players, and so it may not have been a very rewarding meeting for him, right? I'm curious what Bob had to say. Yeah, I'll do that, and I think that's a good use of the rest of our time. By the way, if you get more chances to talk to, and I may or may not have time to answer this now, so it may be a hook for a future, right, session. We came to unanimous agreement on every word in the values portion of the manifesto, and we didn't on the principles. We kind of agreed to disagree because it's down at a level where we would start to disagree. I have a hypothesis that for each one of us, there's at least one principle that makes our blood curdle, that we don't like, right? And so next time you have an Agile Manifesto author up here, you say, which of the principles are you the most uneasy with, and see what they have to say about that. But you know, the Heart of Agile Diamond, I have the thing at the top. It said increase the quality of listening. And I've reflected many times what was the magic. Because if you think about it, we had 16 white males, most of them published, programmers, reasonably famous, high ego, high self-confidence people. How could they possibly agree within like 2 days on that amount of stuff? And that was a big question for me for a lot of years. And I concluded that it's listening with generosity. There was more generosity in the listening and the behavior in that room that I maybe have ever seen in my life before. If you think that we had sworn enemies in the room, Stephen Meller was the author of the Schleyer-Meller method. And there's one thing that all the rest of us agreed was that was carcinogenic and poison and should be dropped in the sea, you know, along with Stephen. And Stephen showed up at our meeting, and I don't know, Bob invited him, why Bob invited him. So the idea was Bob Martins. I was organizing a meetup at the same time at Snowbird. And Bob said, I want to meet in Chicago in February, which is like the only place colder than Chicago in February is Montreal, which is a lot colder than Malmö or Stockholm in February, I will tell you, by the way. And we said, that's a really terrible idea. How about we go skiing at Snowbird instead? So I had the best place, and he had the best idea. He said, I want to write a manifesto. So the idea of writing a manifesto was his. And then he had this invitation list, you know, that had a bunch of people. And we had no Europeans in there. And my partner at the time, Jim Highsmith, we said we have to get somebody at least from Europe. We didn't think about women, beg your pardon. Rebecca Wirfsbrock should have been there because she was definitely in the crew at the time. And I knew her very well, and why I didn't invite her, I don't know. But anyway, so we invited Arie van Bennekom from the Netherlands to come, so we at least had a representative, you know, from Europe there. And then Stephen Meller shows up. And we're all looking at Stephen Meller going like, man, what? Who invited, what? Right? And so we're introducing ourselves, and literally he introduced himself like this. He said, hello, I'm Stephen Meller, I'm a spy. And we all went, okay, right? So we had like the enemy in our midst right there. But when I talk about listening with generosity, there was never a time when anybody belittled anybody else. Everybody listened with the assumption that the other person really knew what they were talking about. Like, this is very, very, very rare. And I know Brian Marek tells a story of big egos and fights, and I don't know what meeting he was at, because that wasn't the same meeting I was at. Right? I never heard anything bad. It was amazing. The most amazing, to make the story within the story, was an interchange between Stephen Meller and Ron Jeffries that I was with, so the three of us. And you have to understand how much we hated the Schleyer-Meller method. You made drawings, and after you made those drawings, you made other drawings, and after those, and I actually collected once there were 14 different intermediate deliverables before you got to the code. Right? Which is, so you spend all your time drawing pictures and making the intermediate deliverables, and then you had the code. And so we hated all of that. And so Ron Jeffries was saying, but if you do the code and you push if you drew the drawings and you push the button and you get the code out, and you need to make a change, you can't change the drawing, you have to change the code, and now you can't go backwards and fix up the drawing. And Stephen said, no, that's not the intention at all. The intention is that you should never have to touch that code. It's like a compiler, right? It just compiles that from the drawings and the annotations. And Ron goes, so that's our new source code language, is drawings annotated, and we do all of our maintenance and all of our tuning and all of our everything in that. And Stephen goes, yeah. And Ron goes, I don't care what the source code language is. If it's drawings mixed with text, I can do that. I don't have a problem with that. Now, we didn't say what we both thought, which is, I don't think you can get there from here. But if that's your research agenda and that's the source code language, I don't have a problem. Boom, we were on the same page, and suddenly Stephen was in with us. He just had a different source code language he was working on, right, than we were. So that's the kind of generosity that was in the room. So to me, that was the magic of the magic, right, was the listening. And that's why I put on the collaboration, increase the quality of listening as the thing to go for first, because that was magic. Now I'm looking at the time, and I'm just going to say a few more things about the meeting, right? For those of you who wouldn't have any idea how the meeting ran. So Bob Martin stood up for like a couple of minutes and said, hey, I'm glad that you're here. I think that we have a lot in common. I'd like to find it if we do. I think we will find that we do. And if so, I'd like to write a manifesto. And then he sat down. We had 17 people. We were in a circle. And you'll notice in what I say next, nobody knows who did what. It was so even that we don't know who said anything. So we're sitting in a circle, and then somebody says, well, we need to build an agenda. How do we build an agenda? And normally the first fight comes on the how do we build an agenda. So how do we build an agenda? Then somebody says, obviously from the XP crowd says, well, I think you should just write it on a card. And of course, being an extreme programming person, had some index cards in his back pocket, pulled out some index cards and wrote something and threw it on the floor. All the other XP people, there were 7 of them there, all the XP people pulled index cards out of their pockets, started writing things and throwing things on the floor. And the non-XP people, you know, like Ari von Bennekom hadn't, you know, the Scrum guys hadn't done this before, they all go, can I have some cards, please? Yeah, thank you very much. And we do that, we throw them on the floor. Now we have a pile of cards on the floor, and then somebody says, so now we have ideas for an agenda. How do we make an agenda out of it? And somebody says, well, I guess anybody who cares stays and does that, and anybody who doesn't care could take a coffee break. Since I don't care, I took a coffee break. I came back, and everything was on the window, right? And there was agenda. I have no idea. I never ever looked at it. But the cool part was about, you know, some little while later, somebody says, hey, I want to add something to the agenda. How do I do that? And somebody says, go put it on the agenda. And this person goes, what? We have no idea, right? What that person put on the agenda, where they put it on the agenda. But that's how the meeting ran, right? Where are you going to get a meeting like that between 17, right, white, male, programmer, published people? Like, that's the question, right? And then the thing, and we don't know who did that something over something, and I love that nobody takes credit. Whoever did that has never said, I did that. I love it. We don't know who did that. But, you know, so we come in and there's a something over something, and we all go, that's pretty cool, right? Because then you don't have to badmouth anybody, right? And then we all worked on it, and we went over every single word. How do you feel about that phrase? And people would be like with the thumbs. And if anybody was like this, would go, what's bothering you? So I'm responsible, it says comprehensive documentation, because it used to say working software over documentation. I said, I can't go and say that you can't have documentation. I can't do that. So we argued, you know, a little bit and came up with a comprehensive, and they said, how are you? I'm okay now, that's fine, you know, I can live with that. We got to the end, and finally it was like, how do you feel? And there were 17 thumbs straight up in the air. We're all like big goggle-eyed, like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened, right? Boom. And the only other thing of note, while we did the principles, it was clear we weren't going to get closure at the same level. People were starting to leave, travel, disagreements, agree to disagree. But the thing that was interesting was because we were used to doing things unanimously, there were no further decisions made, distributed project, because we were doing by email at this point instead of face-to-face. So at the UPSLA conference, when we all got together, we were all in the room, at the, you know, again, someone said, I think we need to like stop this unanimous stuff, right? Everybody's going to go do their own thing. So we took one last vote that we wouldn't need to be unanimous anymore. And we were unanimously in favor of the fact that, so we're all with our thumbs up, look at each other. I guess we're not unanimous anymore. And then Ken Schwaber said, hey guys, I want to ask permission. Is it okay? I want to start a thing called the Scrum Alliance. Is it okay? And we all said, we just took a vote. Do whatever you want, man. Right? And that's how the Scrum Alliance got going. And that's a good time to end. It's beer time. So thank you much, everybody, for your time.